If the product is good, you can make a great business out of it.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Postpilot. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 137, and my guest is Shawna Hausman. Shawna is a seasoned e-commerce and digital marketing executive with over 25 years of experience building and scaling consumer brands. Shawna's career spans iconic retailers and high-growth startups across fashion, home, beauty, baby, and consumer goods. And today, she's the founder of AAA Growth Agency, where she helps companies unlock their next phase of digital growth. We dig into Shawna's unconventional career path, from selling apples as a kid to mastering retail finance, buying, and e-commerce leadership, and how those experiences shaped her pragmatic, product-first approach to marketing. We also explore what it really takes to innovate inside both startups and large organizations, how to think about attribution and measurement when brand marketing gets hard to quantify, and why the right leadership mindset matters more than company size. This is a candid, practical conversation about growth, risk, and career decisions, packed with insights from marketers, operators, and anyone navigating the chapter of their professional journey. But before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Branstetter of the Wow Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Shawna Hausman. Shawna is an experienced e-commerce and digital marketing executive with a 25-year history of working in both retail startups and large retail organizations across a wide variety of verticals: fashion apparel, home goods, baby products, athletic gear, lingerie, and consumer goods. Shawna has worked with such world-class brands as West Elm, American Eagle, Bed Bath & Beyond, FSA Store, and Victoria's Secret. She's skilled in brand and performance marketing, site strategy and operations, digital trend analysis, web optimization, and retail finance. Shawna's focus as a leader is a blend of execution, strategy, and innovation. Shawna, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Great to see you again. I'm looking forward to connecting and hearing about all the good things you've been doing.
Me too. I love meeting with you, seeing you. This is great. Thanks for having me.
Okay. We start the show, every show, getting some background from the guest, kind of that first story, where you grew up, and how your upbringing might have suggested the kind of career that you have had.
All right. Well, I've got a funny one for you. Most people don't realize that I actually grew up on an apple orchard. We were not farmers, but the town I lived in had originally been orchard land. So the house was actually on a couple acres with 100 apple trees. And, my dad really enjoyed doing that in his spare time. So he was out there working on the yards and tending to the trees. And in apple season, we would open up the property as pick your own apples. So, all growing up through elementary school, on the way down to the bus stop at the bottom of the driveway, my brother and I had the job of putting everything on a little cart, putting on a little dolly and dragging down to the bottom an antique scale, a little card table, a folding table, and a little cigar box. And we had signs that I had painted up that said, pick your own apples, 25 cents a pound. And, people would come and they would pick apples and they'd be walking around the yard on the weekend. And we would be out there helping people, giving out bags, helping them pick the ones at the top of the trees. It was a great experience. I really loved it. And, people were very honest. If they didn't have exact change, we would get letters in the mailbox like, I'm so sorry, I didn't have exact change. Here's the 10 cents I owed you from Tuesday afternoon. So, it was really very cool. It was like a little business, and my brother and I really had a chance to take a big hand in it.
And was that something that was, foundational for you in moving into retail? You will get into your, finance background.
I always was really interested in having jobs, little jobs, and making money. And yeah, I mean, it seemed like at that age something you could do, and it was tangible. There was product, and as a kid, I always loved product in general. And it kind of started to have me thinking about how do you connect your love of products with a job. And as a kid, a lot of these jobs are very esoteric. Someone would say consulting, finance, whatever. But going into retail, you're like, oh, I understand that I could go sell cool products or work with cool products or design cool products and look at those great ads. It always really sparked my imagination.
So you did get your start in finance at Old Navy, and I also started my career in finance. And people often say to me, "Geez, how did you make the move from being an accountant into catalog marketing and ultimately
Yep.
digital marketing?" And you followed a similar path. Not necessarily, I don't know if you were a CPA or not, but you were in finance. So that leap from finance into marketing, how did that happen for you?
I ended up in finance in kind of a roundabout way. I went to Old Navy as an intern, and it was a summer internship, and it was a whole program. And at the end of the summer, I really liked it. I was just going to go to San Francisco for the summer on a boondoggle with my now husband and a couple friends. And we all got internships. And at the end, I said, we really like it. So my husband and I stayed, and our friends left and said, "You guys are crazy. What are you doing out in California? Come back east." And we said, "Yeah, let's stay for a couple years." And at the end of the summer, I was like, I really want to be in marketing. That's all I want is to be in marketing. And they said the only ones that are hiring right now, because it's off cycle, Old Navy finance. And I was like, finance? I don't want to be in finance. I want to be in marketing. I came out here and work at this cool company. And that's when someone pulled me aside and said to me, "Listen, there's plenty of time to go into marketing. You really need to start out in finance to understand retail math." He said, "It's not like any other kind of math out there. And if you don't have the foundation, you will never move up the ranks and get where you want to go." He said, "Because you cannot be an executive in a company like this without understanding, what he was calling retail math." And you know what? I give that same advice to so many people when they're starting out in their careers. It sounds glamorous and sexy to be in some of these roles. You imagine you're on photo shoots and you're sitting in a room coming up with the next slogan, but even in the most creative roles, obviously you need to understand metrics at the end of the day. You're managing your own P&L, you're managing a team and salaries and numbers and analytics. I really am glad I got that advice and had that foundation. But I always knew that wasn't where I wanted to be long term. So a lot of it was me trying to figure out like what is going to be that path to, I would say, a more creative role. It wasn't always like in the most high, the brand, big capital B brand roles I was looking at. It was really what is going to be a creative role. And at the time that was marketing. I mean, that was before e-commerce was even on the table, but that's where I saw my career going ultimately. But man, I think that finance background keeps coming back in the end and helping me out with every role I take.
So finance into buying at Bed and Bath. What was that transition like for you?
I think to kind of understand these transitions, I'm someone who I always like to try something new. So when there's something in front of me that I haven't done before and it looks interesting, I'm the first one to say, let me give it a shot. I'd love that opportunity. So in the middle of business school, you have a summer and you do an internship, and that internship ends up being pretty important. I ended up getting an internship with Bed Bath and Beyond. So, every day I was getting in a car, commuting out to Long Island. It was like a 2-hour drive each way. And the roles that were available, because they were recruiting at business school, were in, not in actually finance itself, but in like a financial planning role, in like company planning, they called it. And I was working on special projects for them at the time. So they were at the time they just acquired a company called Harmon Health and Beauty, which was, a small chain in the Northeast, family run from forever. And they bought this chain because they wanted to get into that CPG space and start to open up store within a stores. And they had bought the company, they had started a couple of these test stores. And my summer internship was to go in there and run the analytics on these and see if they were working. So I get in there, it was a very interesting concept, right? I'd never really thought about a store within a bigger box store. And I never had worked with product, CPG type products. And, so I was in there using my analytical background to think about product differently. I did that for a while. Then after business school, I stayed on in that position. But at that point, they said, you know what, we're going to actually, this is going to work. Let's really invest deeper into that Harmon team and the next steps for that. So they took me and a couple people from the Bed Bath organization, some pretty senior people in planning, and they inserted us into this startup that was actually based in New Jersey. So my Bed Bath career actually shifted into like really more of a Harmon career. And at the time, the family ran all the aspects of the business. It was like the son and the daughter and the in-law and the this and the that and the cousin, they were all the buyers. But since the company had been purchased, their contracts were coming due, right? They were all like, we've fulfilled our responsibility to stay, whatever it was, 12 months, 18 months, and they were moving on to their next thing. And at the time, I was over there mostly helping to get them onto the Bed Bath & Beyond systems, because Bed Bath is very operational, very systems oriented. Harmon was like everything was happening on paper, in the back room. As I was doing that work, I started to get to know the team, the products, the stores very well. And as one of the people left, I said, I'd love to try buying. It's a lateral move. Would you be okay with me just keeping my title, keep the salary? Can I move into that role? And they said, sure. You want to give it a try? We'll put you underneath a senior manager who's done this for a long time. And I ended up taking over hair care, sun care, and skincare, which were, product categories I actually had a personal interest in. And, it wasn't such a big leap to go from product planning to product buying. It's just that you're really more on that front line with products, going to conferences, testing all the products out, feeling them on your skin, understanding what people are looking for, really getting deep in there with the product. What are the customers looking for? And that was a fun job. That was a really, really fun job. I was glad I made that move to get just that much closer to product.
We'll talk about some of the other brands that you've been in, but if you think back to your career, and you've worked in small businesses, more niche, and you've worked in some larger ones. Is there one that you found an affinity towards? Is it easier to scale a brand that has is more well known, or is it easier to scale a smaller brand that's not as well known but maybe doesn't have as many rules around how you can do things?
I definitely think the latter. And it doesn't always mean a bigger or smaller. It really is the mentality of the leadership team and how much latitude they'll give you to test things, try things, think outside of the box. When it's a small organization, you really do control a lot of it. So by default, you get a lot more latitude because you're running the whole section of that business. Like for instance, at Giggle, I was running all of digital, but then you run into your own issues where there's not a lot of money, so you're hamstrung by that. At bigger companies that have a lot of money, like a Victoria's Secret, it's very matrixed and it's very hard, to make a decision where you're going to take something in a new direction, do something that seems very innovative. It's not that they're opposed to it. It just it's a much longer time frame to get that going. I think that the ideal for me was when I was at West Elm, while it was part of Williams-Sonoma Inc., massive company with lots of history, obviously, West Elm was really the baby brand. At the time I was there, it was this, this brand that was out in Brooklyn. Everybody else was in San Francisco. And the product was really not doing much. And they brought in Jim Brett, who, probably familiar with. He had come up from Anthropology Home. And they said, listen, like, here you go. This is like, we're not sure what we're going to do with this brand. It's not doing anything. They were probably behind the scenes thinking of shutting it down. But he came in and redesigned the product, made it great. And then they said, all right, you know what, let's invest in this. And they started building out a team. So I joined to run e-commerce. And because we were this startup, we were out of the line of sight a bit. We got to do some really interesting stuff and be really in that growth mode, in that kind of more startup-y growth mode because we were not one of the heritage brands. And I think they weren't so worried about something not working. And because of that, all the tech folks out in San Francisco who were like really, a lot of them were ex-eBay people who they really wanted to innovate. They were like, oh, let's try this new tool out. And we became the test company, the test brand for things like Bloomreach and Narvar and Olapic, which isn't around anymore, but we were one of the first brands to do user-generated content.
And I remember Olapic, and my most favorite coffee mug has an Olapic logo on it.
That was such a great company. Those guys were great. It was a big organization, but it was just the right moment and the right conditions to be able to be in growth mode with resources. That was like, it was the winning combination.
How do you think about, especially when you're in being allowed to be innovative, you can't do everything, right? There's only a limited amount of time and resources, and both human and financial. How do you prioritize what you can get done? I mean, I've worked in environments where there's lots of idea generators, and, they create a priority list, and then, they start working on the priority list, and somebody has a great new idea, and immediately it becomes the top of the priority. How do you organize the people that work for you? How do you organize yourself in that context?
Well, my team would say that I've got more ideas than there is time to do. And it's funny, I'm constantly coming up with ideas, and my team, I've had a lot of people work with me over the years, and I keep bringing them along with me. And one woman in particular, this woman, Latoya Adams, she's known me for a long time. And I'll be sitting in meetings and I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. We should do that. And everyone starts to sweat because they're like, oh my God, we don't have any time to do that. And she has to keep pulling them aside and saying, she doesn't really mean she wants to do it now. She just wants to do it at some point. And I'm always like, I'm going to forget this. Somebody write it down. And so she's my like, all right, I got it. It's going on the list. It's going on the list. We're not going to forget about it. I am kind of that ideas person, and I would love to do it all. But yes, you're right. You can't do it all at one time. We would sit down and have prioritization meetings. We would come up with big chunks of things we wanted to do. Then we would flow out the different elements of each of those projects. Who was going to do what were the timelines on these things? And of course, you're doing that not just within your channel or within your department, but it has to all roll up to the corporate goals. So, in the end, you've got to operate within that, more traditional goal setting process. But I am someone who likes to move fast and be creative and think outside the box. So when people come to me and say, I think we should test this, I think I can like work some extra hours to do it, or I can figure out a way to do it inexpensively or whatnot. I'm the one that's like, do it. Yes, let's go. Let's go. So it's good and bad. I like to move faster sometimes than other people are comfortable with, which is why I do tend to gravitate towards roles where there is that growth mindset, so that I feel like I can do my best work and bring a lot to the table, and I'm not getting extraordinarily frustrated.
This episode is sponsored by Postpilot. Postpilot is an AI-powered, full-funnel direct mail platform built for D2C and omni-channel brands. Think of it as Meta plus Klaviyo, but for direct mail. With Postpilot, you can prospect and retarget as you do on paid channels to drive net new revenue, and you can run hyper-targeted lifecycle marketing as you do on your owned channels, sending the right message to the right customer at the right time. Plus, Postpilot natively integrates with Shopify and Klaviyo, tracks all campaign KPIs in real time, and can dynamically pull data from your entire e-com stack into postcard messaging, ranging from loyalty points to quiz responses to subscription anniversaries. And before you say, I don't even have time to think about adding another channel, Postpilot does all the work for you. With their pro plans and above, you'll have a dedicated in-house account manager and expert designer who take care of strategy, planning, and creative, which means you'll be able to launch a new channel while barely lifting a finger, all in about a week. There's a reason brands like Hexclad, Dr. Squatch, and Diane von Furstenberg trust Postpilot for direct mail. Postpilot is running a special offer for listeners of the Marketing Playbook. Launch with Postpilot and they'll match 10% of your first postcard campaign sends for free. For example, if you send 30,000 postcards, get 3,000 free. Send 50,000 and you get 5,000 for free. Learn more at postpilot.com. You've had different verticals, which is interesting, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on different verticals. In e-commerce, are they different? Are they the same? You've had home fashions. You mentioned in West Elm, you had a kids business, which is Giggle. I know Allie Wing as well.
Yeah.
From Giggle, you were in the lingerie space at Victoria's Secret. Let's see, what else? So you were at Bed and Bath and American Eagle, so a different kind of an apparel space. Same or different depending upon the vertical?
At the end of the day, if the product is good, you can make a great business out of it. If the product is bad, it's a non-starter. And I've seen it all. I've seen it all, Mark. There have been times when I've ended up in a role where, and I'm not going to name names, but it's clear almost on day one that the product isn't right or the understanding of the customer isn't right. It just isn't going to work. And it's not that vertical isn't appealing to me or whatnot, or I don't think I could be successful in that vertical. It's just that the product has to be there. And I think if the product is there, you can really apply your knowledge of the business and your approach and everything you've learned over the years to make a successful business out of that product. But, it's, as I said, I've kind of seen it all. And you will struggle so much to try and to sell something that people don't really want. And it's never a good thing. And sometimes you just don't know till you get there. But it is worth mentioning because I think sometimes people get really excited about a role and they don't take a minute to step back and say, I don't think that there's really a customer for this product. And I've fallen prey to this too. You get sort of lured in by a glamorous product type or a big salary or a big title. You gotta really look at what the product is on day one. But a sub bullet to that is that it's always really fun to sell products that you are also a customer of. It adds an extra fun element. I don't think it's necessarily harder or easier, but it's exciting to work with things that you actually are excited that you would use as a customer.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been in a lot of different retailers, in my career, and I spent time at Brooks Brothers. I've been at Eddie Bauer. Products that I could really get behind personally. Steve Madden, even from a shoe perspective. And then I had a fairly long run, in businesses that were plus size women's. The work was interesting, but it just wasn't a product that resonated with me. I couldn't think like a plus size woman necessarily, and it was just a little bit different. So I hear you on that. Let's talk about measurement for a second, back to, your math background, and we'll also get to what you're doing today. But how are you measuring performance of dollars that you're spending in marketing? Pick one of your brands, maybe even pick a client that you're working with now. How are you helping, people think through where their next best dollar is spent?
When I was at FSA store.
What kind of business was that, Shawna?
It's a consumer goods company that sells exclusively FSA eligible products. So if you participate in a flexible spending account or another tax advantaged health account, this is a place where you can actually use those dollars. And, there's a lot of regulations around what product categories you can buy. People get very confused. They forget to use their FSA dollars and they use it or lose it. So it was a great business because people were just searching for something to make that process easier. They just didn't know about it. So it was an interesting business where for us, the main thing was just getting the word out. Once people knew about it, they were like, oh my gosh, I lost $200 last year. I'm so annoyed. Thank God, I wish I knew about you guys. Really, that initial acquisition was so important. And getting the word out, but we weren't really going to be doing massive national advertising campaigns. So we had to be more surgical than that. And you could never know who has these accounts. You're kind of blanketing everyone, young, old, whatnot. Until someone retires, they could be eligible. We really relied heavily on attribution models. We used a company called Measured, at the time, they were really the top product out there. I think there are more competitors in the space now, but those are the ones that I used most recently. And it really made such a difference. I mean, the fact that you can get, that information at your fingertips, it's not only great for decision making, but it helps alleviate a lot of the conversations with your other business partners. I know that there's always a conversation around the tension or the communication between your CFO and CMO. But when you can come with data that really can explain in a better way that putting more money into paid social, for instance, is in fact driving the top line, because you can't always see it when you're just digging into Google Analytics. You don't see that, and you end up having these circular conversations where it's like, our brand is so strong, everyone's just typing in our URL and coming. Why are we bothering to spend money anyway? Why are we even doing this? We don't need it. Everyone's just showing up on our doorstep.
For the same reason that Coca-Cola still advertises.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's tough because you need to be respectful, and you need to come to the table with an answer that everyone understands. Before that modeling, before I had that at my fingertips, it was very, very difficult, because you have to keep explaining. They're not just waking up one day and showing up at your site, typing in your URL, unless you happen to own clothes.com or, but the attribution methodology and that analysis we were able to pull from that was really, it changed the game for us. And it helped us, not just with how much to invest in Google versus Facebook versus Instagram. It was just overall that entire category of investment that became so much clearer across the organization.
Let's stay on that line of questions around paid media and, top of funnel. You talked about the tension between a CMO and a CFO. I never experienced that. I have no idea what you're talking about. It gets even worse, when you're trying to, as the marketer, to get top of funnel brand awareness. So how did you think that through? How did you, work with your team to be able to, find that balance between top of funnel that's not going to necessarily drive an ROI right now, but is parcel of getting your brand out there?
That is really like the $1 million question. You measure what you can measure. If you're someone that's spending a lot of money, then I think you can tell better if it works or doesn't work. If you're doing a big, massive campaign and you don't see any lift, then you kind of have your answer there. If you're not doing a massive spend, then it's really nuanced and it's really tough. You could ask customers and do some surveying and see, how'd you hear about us? Where'd you come from? It's not necessarily going to tell you what you want to know. I think at the end of the day, it goes back to working within an organization that really does believe in the brand and is willing to think about building that brand in a way that's more than just, well, we'll put something out on Facebook and hope that someone clicks it. You need to build that entire kind of end-to-end campaign mentality. And there is always going to be a leap of faith in there, especially when you're spending big, big bucks. I will say this, I will caveat this with the fact that I have not been in a position where I have been holding the purse strings personally on, what I call capital B brand spend. For me, it's we didn't do a lot of that at FSA Store, as I was mentioning. We were able to be more targeted, and it was very successful because, again, it was just, hey, we exist and we're called FSA Store, and come spend your FSA dollars at our FSA store. It was a different game altogether. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, that is probably the toughest one. And, I bet if you're at Coca-Cola, you said, there are lots of different ways they're measuring. I mean, I have been involved in holdout studies where you'll pick markets and you'll just suppress them. You can definitely learn from that, what's working, especially if you're trying out like television or radio or, even podcast. But in terms of the big, like, we're going to go for the big wow factor, we're going to do the Super Bowl ad, we're going to do whatever. I don't know. I mean, I really do think at the end of the day, it is a leap of faith on some of this stuff.
So lots of big brands in your background, and now you've launched a growth agency called AAA Growth Agency. When we reconnected, I think I made a wisecrack comment that you selected AAA so that you'd be the first in the phone book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about what AAA Growth Agency is, how you're helping clients, and I'd really like to hear about the challenges that you're seeing folks come to you most frequently with right now.
The reason I decided to move into more of this agency, starting an agency, doing more consulting work as opposed to jumping into a full-time job again, was that I started to really take a step back and think, what is it that I love to do? What gets me out of bed in the morning? As you and I have spoken about, I've had a lot of different roles at a lot of different companies and a lot of different verticals. And it was the stuff like being at West Elm and in that moment where we could drive rapid growth. It was when I showed up at FSA store, I started actually in a consulting position doing this type of work. And they had just been purchased by private equity. And the equity folks said, hey, we need someone to come in and really do a deep dive into the digital business here and understand their current operating model, who's there from the team, what are they working on, what is the platform like, what vendors are they working with. And I got to go in there and do real deep dive into all aspects of the business. I wasn't, hamstrung by politics. I wasn't reporting to someone who I didn't want to offend. And, not that I'm trying to offend anybody, but, when you're internal and you got to kind of tiptoe around stuff like that, it's harder. And so I went in deep and I came back and I said, hey, listen, you're running $100 million business on a homegrown website that I don't even know how this thing hasn't collapsed yet, but like you're not going to make it through another peak season on this thing. And this is what it's roughly going to cost from my experience to build a new website. And you're going to have to build out massive, not just like, hey, hire a whole bunch of people, but they didn't really have even an e-commerce team at the time. They had no one doing site merchandising. The site was hard coded. Product pages were being hard coded onto the site. And therefore they didn't need any of those roles. But I said, you're going to need a website. You're going to need teams to run this thing. And here are the people that I think can get it done. And here are some agencies that are ripping you off and save you a couple $100,000 a year by getting rid of those guys. And I presented my findings and kind of said, like, here you go. I'm off to my next consulting job. And they said, all right, well, we hear you, and why don't you just come do it? Why don't you come be CMO and do this? And it was like they said yes to really everything I recommended. So I couldn't turn it down, right? I couldn't turn it down. And I did join, and I do not regret that at all. But that initial digging in and really thinking about the business, thinking strategically, getting to know a new business, a new team, that I loved it. I loved it. And, when I started thinking about what was the most exciting thing, it was really that experience of being able to really clearly see where growth was going to come from and the path to getting there, and then articulating it and creating that roadmap, and whether it's for me to actually implement, or for them to take and implement, that's really fun. So that's the kind of stuff I'm focusing on now, is going in and working with companies. I'm currently working with a company that was recently acquired, going in and really understanding their operating model and working with the new owners to think through, these guys may need more resources, or they may need a new website, or what is it that they're going to need, and let's coordinate and figure out, how much do you want to spend, how long of a time investment do you want to put into making this, what are your goals, do you want to sell the company, do you want to keep the company? That stuff is all really fascinating to me. And and then I get to try out different things, and that's what I love. I love that strategic, fast thinking growth mode mentality. And if I could find consulting gigs doing this all day, all year long, then I'll be a happy clam over here.
How have you been able to transition in your mind from going to a same job, same role every day, into, something that's, a little less stable, if you will?
That's been the part that's a little bit of a transition because I get very emotionally involved. Not in a like overly emotional way, but I really want to see these companies succeed, and I get really excited. I want to know what's going on and who's working on what. And when you're not there full time, you don't get that full visibility, and you're not going to be in all the meetings. That was like a little bit of a strange change, to say, all right, I actually have to have some boundaries here. I can't, because what would happen is I would be in meetings and I would be doing this, and then I would spend the rest of the day thinking about it. And I was like, I can't do that. This is not going to work for anybody, because I can't just spend, 50 hours a week thinking about a business that I'm only working on 15 hours a week. So that was a bit of a shift, but I can't say I regret it. I think everyone has said all along, you get to pick the companies and the jobs you're most excited about. You get the flexibility back in your life to spend with your kids. I have two teenagers right now, and everyone says that they need you so much when they're little. I'm like, I don't know. I think they kind of need you a lot when they're teenagers. There's a lot going on,
Well,
between.
I have two adult children, and they
Yep.
need you even as adults.
Yep. Yep.
And then, I have a granddaughter now, and I want to be
Oh,
needed
great.
by her. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
I hear you. I hear you. All right. So as we close this out, you've had lots of experiences. Give me, if you've got a couple of key takeaways that you want our listeners to walk away with.
This is really all about kind of career path. My number one is, if there's an opportunity that presents itself and you're looking at it and you're saying, I don't really know how to do that. I'm not an expert in that. I'm not going to apply for that job. I'm not going to raise my hand for it internally. Let me wait until maybe I know a little more. Don't wait, because women especially will sit back and say, you know what, I don't really know how to do that whole thing. Well, most people when they start a new job, don't know how to do the whole thing. That's why you start doing it and you learn. And if you're a smart person, you'll pick it up. So I think people need to just have the courage to say, I'm smart, I can figure it out. I'm going to try that. I want to take that jump. That's something that I've always tried to be bold about, and it's always served me well. That being said, my next piece of advice would be, don't be afraid of the risk. I lived in San Francisco during the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust. I was there from 98 to '02. It taught me not to be worried about being fired, companies going under. That was just the way it was out there. And we all got really used to it. And it wasn't because we were bad employees or anything. If there's something that looks like it could be interesting, but it's risky, you're not sure, maybe what if they go out of business? Don't worry about it. Like, it's not, some people think being fired is the scariest thing in the universe. It's really not. And it happens to everybody. It really does. And it's not scary. It's completely fine. And you go get another job, but don't shy away from a job that you might really enjoy because you're worried it's going to be too risky. And also, on the flip side, don't stay in a job that you really don't like. It's not working. I know so many people that say, they come home every day. They're so unhappy, and this person isn't listening to them, or the product isn't selling, or the corporate strategy isn't right. And they have a pit in their stomach all day long, but they're nervous. Like, what? The economy's not so great. Maybe I'm not going to get another job. So they stay, and it just kind of eats away at them every day, to the point where they're not even really looking for another job, and they're demoralized. It's like, don't stay, just go. When it's time to go, just go. And your health, your emotional well-being, and your physical health is just not worth it. All this stuff works out in the end. It all
Yeah,
works out in the end.
I think the best part. It all works out in the end. It does seemingly do so. So great, good thoughts here. We're down to the end of the show, Shawna. We do a 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are
All right,
you
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
Bombus.
Favorite app on your phone.
Instagram.
Last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Quince.
Something that you're not good at but wish that you were.
Oh, remembering everyone's names and faces.
Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Anything related to women's health or reproductive rights.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
To control the weather.
Other than family, what's your most prized possession?
I have a stack of letters and cards from family members and ex-employees that are really meaningful to me. I have them in a stack in my bottom drawer of my dresser. They're precious to me.
Oh, that's really
Really
nice.
are.
That's nice. Where can people reach out to you on social media if they choose?
LinkedIn, reach out to me for sure. I'm always open to talking to people.
That's great. Well, look, Shawna, it was nice to see you. Thanks very much for your insights and your experiences. Really enjoyed catching up.
Great seeing you today, Mark. Great seeing you.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Shawna Hausman for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, don't wait to be ready. Growth comes from doing. One of Shawna's strongest messages is that most people wait too long before raising their hand. The reality is that very few people start a new role knowing how to do everything. Growth comes from stepping into opportunities slightly before you feel ready and trusting yourself to learn fast. Whether it's a new role, a stretch project, or a career pivot, momentum favors action over perfection. Number 2, risk is inevitable. Avoiding it is the bigger mistake. Having lived through the dot-com boom and bust, Shawna reframes risk in a powerful way. Layoffs, company failures, and pivots happen to almost everyone, and they're not personal failures. Avoiding interesting opportunities because they feel risky often leads to stagnation, while embracing risk builds resilience and perspective. And number 3, don't stay where you're unhappy. It costs you more than you think. Shawna's most personal advice is also the most human. Staying in a job that makes you miserable slowly erodes your confidence, health, and motivation. Fear keeps people stuck far longer than logic should, but in her experience, it always works out in the end. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.